Imagine a quiet Tuesday evening in a suburban kitchen where the glow of a smartphone screen illuminates a stack of unopened mail. A couple sits at the table, both exhausted after 9-hour workdays and 40-minute commutes. They earn more than their parents ever did, yet as they scroll through their banking app, the math doesn't make sense. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American household now spends $26,266 a year on housing alone, swallowing more than 33% of their total annual expenditure. But the real drain isn't just the mortgage or the rent. It is the silent, incremental cost of simply being too tired to function. This is the story of how the middle class isn't being taxed by the government alone, but by a structural time tax that converts every saved minute into a recurring monthly subscription. We often talk about the economy in terms of gross domestic product or interest rates, but for the modern family, the most relevant currency is time. There is a specific transition that happens when a household moves from a single income to a dual income structure. While the top-line revenue increases, the internal labor of the home, the cooking, the cleaning, the child-rearing, the maintenance, doesn't vanish. It simply gets outsourced. This creates a monthly minimum or a second rent. It is a hidden overhead where time-saving conveniences become fixed costs. When you are time poor, you lose the ability to choose the cheaper option. You pay for the delivery app because you can't face the grocery store. You pay for the premium childcare because you can't leave work at 4 in the afternoon. You pay for the convenience because, quite literally, you have no other choice. Consider the shift in family dynamics over the last several decades. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2024 shows that 49.6% of married couple families are now dual-income households. On paper, this looks like a massive win for household wealth. However, the Levy Economics Institute noted in 2025 that roughly 39% of single adults suffer from time poverty, with employed women experiencing this at a rate 9 percentage points higher than men. When both adults in a home are working full-time, the free labor that once sustained the middle class, the homemade meals, the DIY home repairs, the community carpooling, is replaced by a line item on a credit card statement. This isn't a lack of discipline, it's a structural necessity. Think about the way we move. Transportation is no longer just the cost of a car. It is a 17% chunk of total household spending, averaging $13,318 a year. Despite the high cost, the support systems to offset this are vanishingly small. In 2024, only 10% of private sector workers had access to commuting subsidies. This means the vast majority of the middle class is paying out of pocket to sit in traffic, burning fuel and time simultaneously. When you spend 2 hours a day in a car, you aren't just losing time, you are losing the energy required to avoid high-cost convenience behaviors later in the evening. Let's look at a hypothetical household. We can call them the Millers. They earn a combined $120,000 a year. After federal and state taxes, they might take home $95,000. Their housing costs them the standard $26,266. Their 2 cars and insurance eat up another $13,318. Already, before they've bought a single bag of groceries or paid a utility bill, nearly 42% of their take-home pay is gone. Because both work, they require childcare. Child Care Aware of America reported in 2024 that the average cost has hit $13,128 a year. This isn't a luxury, it's the entry fee for having a job. The pressure on this specific category is intense. According to the Bank of America Institute, childcare inflation was running at 5.2% year over year in September 2025, which is 1.5 times faster than the overall rate of inflation. For the Millers, this means that even if they get a standard 3% raise at work, they are actually falling behind. Their monthly minimum is rising faster than their purchasing power. When you subtract the childcare from their remaining $55,000, they are down to roughly $42,000. We haven't even touched food, healthcare, or the convenience overhead yet. It is worth pausing here to consider a different perspective. Some might argue that these costs are choices, that one could simply live in a smaller home or drive an older car. Reasonable people disagree on where the line between necessity and lifestyle creep sits. However, this depends heavily on geographic location and professional requirements. In many American cities, the cheaper housing is located so far from the job centers that the resulting increase in transportation costs and time loss completely negates the savings on rent. This doesn't apply if you have a fully remote role with total schedule flexibility, but for the majority of the workforce, the physical location of the job dictates a high-cost lifestyle. One could also argue that technology has made life cheaper. We have access to infinite entertainment and cheaper consumer goods than our grandparents did. While this is true for a television or a t-shirt, it is patently false for the big three of the middle-class budget: housing, education, and healthcare. You cannot upscale your way out of a mortgage or a childcare bill. The things that have dropped in price are the things we want. The things that have skyrocketed in price are the things we need to survive in a professional society. We are seeing a physical manifestation of this shift in how we carry money. The Atlanta Fed's 2024 study on Survey and Diary of Consumer Payment Choice found that the average cash held on a person dropped from $81 in 2023 to just $67 in 2024. We are moving toward a frictionless digital economy where every transaction is tracked and often automated. This frictionlessness is a double-edged sword. It makes it easier to spend on those small, recurring convenience taxes that we don't even process as spending. A $5 delivery fee or a $10 priority shipping charge feels negligible in the moment, but when these are used to bridge the gap of time poverty daily, they form a second rent that can easily total hundreds of dollars a month. Returning to the Millers, let's look at their leftover $42,000. If we apply the average expenditure for food, utilities, and health care, they are likely spending another $20,000 a year. This leaves them with $22,000. If they spend just $40 a week on prepared meals or delivery because they are too exhausted to cook, that's $2,080 a year. If they pay for a lawn service or a cleaning person once every 2 weeks to reclaim their Saturday, that's another $3,000. Suddenly, a family making a good six-figure income is left with around $17,000 in true discretionary savings. One major car repair or a medical deductible, and that wealth evaporates. This leads to a phenomenon where people feel poor despite their salaries. It is a form of functional poverty where the ceiling is high but the floor is rising even faster. We have to ask, if the cost of participating in the economy, the childcare, the commuting, the convenience is so high, is the dual income model actually providing the financial freedom it promised? For many, the second income isn't building a legacy. It's simply servicing the debt of the time lost by earning that second income. There is a fair counter-argument to be made here. The dual income shift has provided millions of people with professional fulfillment and personal autonomy that wasn't possible in a single earner household. It has increased the total economic output of the country and allowed for a higher standard of living in terms of material goods and travel. We shouldn't ignore the fact that the conveniences we are discussing, like grocery delivery or professional childcare, also represent jobs for other people. It is a complex ecosystem. However, we must distinguish between a choice and a mandate. When these services become the only way to keep one's head above water, they stop being a luxury and start being a tax. Another nuance to consider is that this doesn't apply if a household has access to intergenerational wealth in the form of time. Families who live near retired grandparents who can provide free childcare or help with household labor have a massive, uncounted financial advantage. This creates a widening gap between families who have a local support network and those who are isolated in bedroom communities far from their kin, forced to buy every minute of help they receive. So, How do we look at this without falling into despair? It requires a shift in how we calculate the value of our work. We often look at a job offer and see the gross salary. A more accurate mental model would be to calculate the net hourly rate after all the participation taxes are removed. If a promotion pays $10,000 more a year, but requires an extra hour of commuting and more expensive after-school care, the actual take-home pay per hour might actually decrease. The middle class is being squeezed because we have been conditioned to maximize the top-line number while ignoring the rising cost of the monthly minimum required to earn it. We see this reflected in the way household debt is structured. It isn't just about the big purchases anymore. It's about the accumulation of small, recurring overheads that have become non-negotiable. When housing takes 33% and transportation takes 17%, and childcare takes another 10 to 15%, the margin for error becomes razor thin. We are living in an era where the standard middle-class life requires a level of logistical precision that is increasingly difficult to maintain. If we look at the data from 2024 and 2025, the trend is clear. The cost of time is going up. Whether it's the 5.2% increase in childcare or the lack of commuting support for 90% of workers, the environment is becoming more expensive for those who have the least amount of time to spare. We are witnessing the professionalization of the home, where every traditional domestic task has been turned into a service sector commodity. In the past, the middle class had a buffer of time or a buffer of cash. Today, many have neither. They are running a high-speed engine with no oil. This tax on the middle class is unique because it is largely invisible in traditional political debates. It doesn't show up on a 1040 form, but it shows up in the exhaustion of parents and the stagnation of savings accounts. As we look at the landscape of the next decade, the question isn't just how much you can earn, but how much of your life you have to sell back to the system just to keep your job. We have to start valuing our time not just as a sequence of minutes, but as a financial asset that, when spent poorly, carries a very high interest rate. The real wealth in the modern age might not be the size of the paycheck, but the ability to opt out of the second rent entirely. If you had to choose between a 10% raise and 10 extra hours of free time every week, which one would actually leave you richer at the end of the year?